I'd like to welcome everybody to the May 12th meeting of the Historic Resources Board. Would staff please call roll?
Martin Bernstein.
Here.
Margaret Wimmer. Absent. David Bauer.
Here.
Beth Bunenberg.
Here.
Roger Kohler. Here. Michael McKinnon. Absent.
Okay, thank you. And Pat DeCiccio
Sorry,
is also here.
Pat DeCiccio.
Here.
Here's Margaret. Okay. Here's Margaret. Okay, and I see Board Member Margaret Wimmer is attending also. Good. Okay.
Chair Bernstein,
Yes.
Perhaps recognize the City Council representative at the meeting today.
Yes, and I'd like to welcome Council Member Holman to our meeting. Welcome, Karen. So, thank you. And staff, and welcome to staff also. Good. Okay, I'd like to start off the meeting with our agenda item of oral communications. Any member of the public not attending any of our agenda items would like to speak? I see no cards. Moving on to agenda changes, additions, and deletions. Are there any?
There are none.
City official reports, meeting schedule and attendance. Any issue on that?
No reports.
And then we brings us to our action item. And I'll read the action item. It's request by Ken Lindstedt Architects on behalf of the property owner, Joseph and Melissa Kraus, for Historic Resources Board review of a historic preservation application for proposed alterations and additions to an existing single-family residence and an existing accessory structure at 490 Kingsley Avenue. Designations: Historic Category 3, Professorville District. Zone: Single-family residential, R1 10,000. Environmental review: CEQA exempt per class 15268. Ministerial projects. Well, shall staff have a presentation for us?
Thank you, Chair Bernstein. Matthew Weintraub, project planner. I'll present some information and staff's analysis, and then I believe the applicant would also like to address the board. The project is 490 Kingsley Avenue. The existing historic property is a historic category 3 in the local inventory, also contributing to the Professorville Historic District. It is listed in the National Register. It's Mediterranean Revival style property consisting of 2 buildings, the main residence and the garage, which share the same architectural treatment. Project overview is to alter and renovate the existing historic architectural facades of the residence and the garage, to construct a new 1-story garage addition and an attached trellis structure, and to construct a new carport trellis along Cowper Street. And of course, there are further details of the project work in your report. So a brief analysis of the project according to the standards. Secretary of the Interior Standards, Rehabilitation Standards 2, 5, and 9 all address existing historic architectural features and materials, and they basically, to paraphrase, existing historic architectural features and materials should be preserved and not be removed. Here are some photos of some features that would be affected by the proposed project. In the upper left, we see upper story windows and doors that would be removed, and the openings would be cut open and enlarged about approximately 11 inches upwards, and then new windows and doors would be installed. In the middle upper photograph, we see the heavy cornice detail, which is proposed to be removed and replaced with a lighter type of cornice. In the upper right, we see the clay tile roof, example of clay tile roofs that would be removed at the main house and at the garage. At the lower level, we see the existing Oriole Bay and the front entrance, which would also be essentially removed and replaced with new features, as well as the existing garage doors. And all the garage doors and windows in the garage would also be affected. So some photographs of those types of features that are characteristic to the building that would be affected. Rehabilitation Standard 3 states that adding conjectural features and creating a false sense of development should not be undertaken. So in addition to removing historic architectural features, the project proposes to replace those with different types of features. And on the left, we see existing features, and on the right, we see the proposed replacement features. And in each case, we can see that the detailing and the style is very different. It goes from Mediterranean revival to more restrained classical style. So this is both the front and the back porch, existing historic architectural features, as well as the oriel bay, proposed to be replaced by a square bay. And then here we see the proposed change in the cornice detail. The existing cornice is approximately 2.5 feet of carved wood, and it's proposed to be replaced by a much lighter, thinner cornice. Rehabilitation Standard 2 also discusses spatial relationships of the property. It says that spatial relationships that characterize a property should be preserved. There are two aspects of the project that could affect spatial relationships. One of those is the proposed construction of a carport, trellis carport, adjacent to the Cowper Street elevation. In this case, the parking is proposed to occur essentially in front of the house. Even though this is technically the side street elevation, we can see that the carport would still be placed in front of the side elevation of the house, which is not in keeping with the pattern of development in Professorville, which is that garages are located at the backs of properties. And that's consistent also with the existing development pattern, where we see the existing garage is located to the back of the property and behind the house. So that's one spatial relationship that would be affected by the proposed carport location. Another spatial relationship is the proposed addition or excavation of a light well. This would also be at the Cowper Street elevation here. And so that would change the appearance of the property in terms of being built at grade, which is what all the streetscapes in Professorville look like. Typically, a more appropriate place for a light well is at one of the rear interior elevations. And so this would also be potential effect based on the spatial relationships of the district. And Rehabilitation Standard 10 states that new additions and new construction shall not impair the essential form and integrity of the historic property and its environment. So if we look at the totality of the work being proposed, the work would affect materials and features that are part of the existing historic fabric, and that would also introduce features that would affect the integrity of the property and the district based on staff's analysis. So here we see at the bottom, we see the existing property, very obviously Mediterranean revival style. At the top, we see the proposed work or the proposed product, which would essentially be a bit more of a classical restrained style. And I just want to emphasize this is in no way is staff critiquing the design itself of the proposed building. It's certainly would result in a fine design. The question is it compatible for the district? And that's really what's the question before the board. A couple more aspects of the project. Rehabilitation Standard 9 says that new work shall be differentiated from and subordinate to old work. One of the proposed aspects of the project is to construct a new one-story addition at the existing two-story garage. If evaluated in and of itself, just as the addition, and not taking into consideration the proposed alterations to the existing buildings, staff's analysis is that the new one-story addition would be compatible with the existing historic structures. Here we see the existing garage, and here we see the proposed one-story addition. It would be subordinate in mass and in location to the existing garage, and it would also be differentiated by materials, yet it would use compatible materials in terms of being earth-based and things like that. So staff's analysis is that one of the major features of the project really is to construct this new addition, and that is compatible with the standards, if taken into account, not cumulatively with the other proposed alterations. So staff's recommendation to the HRB is that the proposed alterations, in summary, would adversely affect the existing historic property and its relationship to the district, that the proposed work is not consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards or the Palo Alto standards of review. I should say that the majority of the proposed work, there is some of the proposed work is consistent, and that the HRB may recommend that the applicant modify the application in order to be consistent with preservation standards. Staff's available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Let's see, well, our normal presentation sequence is after the staff recommendation presentation, then for the applicant presentation, and after that, Historic Resources Board questions of the applicant and staff. So we'll keep that normal order. Okay, next, I would like to invite the applicant to do a presentation for us. All right, welcome.
Good morning. My name is Ken Lindstedt. Thanks for meeting with us this morning. I'm the architect for Joe and Melissa Krause for 490 Kingsley. I just want to make a couple of clarifications to the staff report. I believe that Matthew said that the clay tile roof at the main house would be replaced. You did not. Okay. So the clay tile will remain at the main house. We are proposing to remove it at the garage. So our approach here, my clients, they essentially wanted a bit more space in their house. They wanted to add a pool and a pool cabana. I would say that was kind of the primary impetus for our project. We also wanted to improve a basement situation. There's currently a basement, and we want to make it a little bigger. It's currently leaking. It's got some issues foundation-wise. There's an existing light well already facing Cowper. I wanted to make that clarification also. So we're just basically making that one a little bit deeper for our project. So regarding the main house, this is an area that I think is at the crux of the issue in terms of how this house contributes to the neighborhood. I did a house also over on Melville, just behind this house. I'm quite familiar with the character of the houses in this neighborhood. It's fantastic. I think our approach here is to maintain the setting and the style and the form of this house, and we are making minor modifications to some of the details, in essence, to lighten it up a little bit. And I think, just as Matthew said, that is our approach. And I feel as though the net result is it's still going to sit in the neighborhood the same way. It's actually going to feel a little bit better because we're rehabilitating this house. And I guess the question really is the house itself a contributing house based on all of its specific details, or is it more how it holds together as this style of house? We are making minor modifications to the cornice and to a few of the porches. And I would say that we're not trying to have it feel like it's a different style. In many ways, the details that we're planning are trying to be subservient to the style that's there now and not try to make a statement, not try to say that it's now a classical house. I feel like the essential style of this house is going to feel very much the same way. Probably the biggest change will be because it's a lighter house. In some of the old photos that I've seen of the house, it always appears as a white house. And I think the color that's on it now kind of changes the essential feel of that house. Regarding the pool house and the cabana, I agree that, I've done several historic houses where we've had to comply with the standards and making that very specific gesture that this is a new structure on the back of the garage is what we were going for there. We also wanted, so when we make changes like these, I'm also very cognizant of trying to have the whole project hold together and not feel like a lot of, when you make these additions that are very different stylistically, I always am concerned that it doesn't hold together, that there isn't kind of a common thread. So one of our approaches here was to have the cabana be this weathered wood, which I think will feel very good in the backyard in terms of the natural setting. Maintain the stucco facade at the garage, but give both the garage and the addition the same roof, so it doesn't, so that they can kind of be a complete element. And then the carport that's between the stucco house and the stucco and wood garage is also going to be wood. And therefore, we kind of get this palette of stucco, natural wood, and essentially it's just going to be the metal roof. I think those are the elements that I wanted to talk about, and open to all of your questions.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Right. Next on our normal sequence would be Historic Resources Board questions of the applicant or staff. Beth, go ahead.
Actually, I had several questions. I've always been impressed that architects are creative in ways of finding solutions to things. But I'm wondering, in your quest of ways of getting more light, what other options did you consider? Did you consider trimming some of the trees that now cast that afternoon shadow that didn't used to cast the shadow? Have you considered things like light wells up in the ceiling to bring up in that flat center area of the roof? Did you consider those? What other options would you see rather than extending the tops of the windows and taking off that cornice?
It's a great question. I mean, I do think obviously tree trimming is something that would bring more light in. I also think there's inside the spaces, these are pretty high ceilings inside, and the windows are only at 6'8". So I've always been a proponent of the more you lift the window, the more you see the sky, and that kind of sense of reflected light is something that's very important to me in interior spaces. Putting skylights on the roof, I think, I don't love skylights in terms of how you have to shade them, and what they do to interior spaces is not my favorite way to bring light in. But that said, I thought lifting the heights of these windows just 11 inches, it's a lovely proportion for the house and inside the spaces as well, and I thought it was the least obtrusive to the look of this house.
And as a kind of second, you've talked about taking off all these pieces of historic. In your estimation, what's the value of historic fabric? An architect thought long and hard putting this together some time ago, and do you see value in keeping historic fabric?
I do, and I think what we have done is very tasteful, and I don't think it's kind of violating the essential essence of what makes this part of this historic neighborhood. And I guess in response to that, I've been designing houses for 25 years, and if someone comes in and changes one of the houses and some of my details in a very tasteful way, I think it's respectful, and I think it's their right to do so.
And maintaining the integrity of design, is that important to you?
Absolutely.
Of the original? I'll have comments later.
Thank you, Beth. Pat?
I have a few questions myself. To understand further of the reason for making the windows 11 inches in length, is that what is causing you to want to remove the original decorative, beautiful cornices and detail work? And
it was
so
the impetus, yes.
It then involves changing the whole facade. And that was the main reason,
correct.
The original
I would say that, and
condition?
probably a desire on the design team and the owners to have a little bit lighter feel to it. I mean, I realize that it's a historic element because it is part of this house, but and this is for the board to decide, obviously, is the essence of this house all about the cornice, or is it about the scale and the form and the style of the house?
I think it's feature that's so intricate and wonderful that it is significantly important. The front portico or porch, you're intending to remove the inner Tuscan-type columns, or all of them, and put in a different material there? I'm not quite clear on that.
Yes, again, it was for the desire to have the porch be centered under the windows. Currently, there's a very heavy feel to this, so that we don't keep coming back to the same question. We had a desire to lighten up the house a little bit, still maintain the beauty and the style of the house. And so those elements that you're talking about were purely for getting rid of a little bit of this heaviness and lightening it up a little bit without trying to replicate it.
But it's not the outside ones and to stay in place, it's still a new one?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other board members? Margaret?
I had one last question
yeah, please.
I actually was going to ask of Matt.
Yes.
I heard you in your presentation, which was wonderful, to mention the historic, the National Register of Historic Places. Is it actually eligible, or is it on it currently?
It is. It's currently listed on the National Register as a contributor to the Professorville district. So it's within the portion of the district that's listed on the National Register.
Thank you for that.
Wimmer.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Some of the details on this house, I think there's two prominent focal points, one on Kingsley and one on the Cowper elevation, is the single-story bay window on the Cowper side, and then the single-story entry feature on the Kingsley side. And I think those are the fact that they are single-story elements, it kind of gives it a little bit of a human scale, and it allows the overall character of the house and the historic feeling and some of the details to be more experienced on those. It's closer to the human scale. And so it looks like even on the front entry feature, you're completely removing the roof element, because that kind of pulls that Spanish tile down to the single-story level. It looks like you're going with a more modern, flat-roofed detail there, and going from the two columns to the one column. I think for me, I would be a little, because those are such focal points, I think, to those two elevations that maybe they're too modernized in the proposal. And so those are two things that I see that I'm just a little concerned about. And then also, if I am understanding correctly, you're removing the Spanish tile and you're replacing it with a metal roof, is that correct?
Only at the garage.
Oh, okay, sorry,
Yeah.
only at the garage, okay. And then I think also, even with raising the window and door header height on the second floor, what are the interior ceiling heights up there on the second floor? Can you raise the windows even 11 inches? Okay.
Yeah.
It looks like you still have a little bit of an opportunity to mimic some of the original cornice detail in the height that you have, even though you're minimizing it.
Correct.
Just to square it off, it seems like maybe is not as sensitive as you could be in terms of echoing, what's there now, maybe maintaining some of that detail.
Right.
But maybe the proportions are a little bit different. So I would call attention to that.
So, can I respond to your?
Sure.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So, regarding the bay at the dining room, that bay is very close to an oak tree, and if you're in that space, your only sense of light, you kind of have to. This bay it's a pretty bay, but it goes so far out in the side yard and is so close to the oak that you're kind of staring at a tree. And the idea here was, since it is in such disrepair, to actually bring the bay closer to the house. And I know what you're saying about one-story elements. I still think these one-story elements will read at that human scale, just differently. We wanted to bring the bay closer to the dining room so that when you're in the dining room, you're actually getting to see the garden instead of looking through another room at the garden. That was just so you know what the impetus for that was. And regarding the cornice, I think what you were saying is, I don't know that we would mimic that cornice detail. I think probably I think it would come down to if we were to keep all of the dental molding and we like the proportion of that molding, it could just be kept rather than mimicking it. So we're coming to you saying, we're trying to make it a little bit lighter with still, there's still an element of detail to it, but it's just not the same cornice.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Bauer.
Good morning. Thanks for the a much better set of plans than we had the last time you came before us. I was just looking at the plans. It looks to me like the oak tree you were talking about is about 20 feet from the bay. According, I don't have a scale. Do you know what that distance is?
I can find it. Do you have a scale?
I'm just looking at your plan set, and it's our plans are 1/8-inch scale, and it's about 2.5 inches, so that would be roughly.
It looks like about 8 feet.
8 feet. So
Yeah, you're seeing a 27-foot dimension from the bay to the property line.
No, I'm looking at your. I'm looking at the proposed design. So it says there's
Do you have a scale?
19-inch. Sorry, I have the plans are down on the floor so I can read
The
them.
proposed. Are you looking at the proposed plan?
I'm looking at the proposed plan.
Yeah. So it looks like, I don't have my scale with me, but we'll probably be about 16 feet away. With the proposed, it's currently about 8.
Well, it's this one. Okay. Can you tell me what the height is in the second floor bedrooms or the rooms? What the
Right
ceiling
around
height?
9 feet.
9 feet. I mean, 9 feet, 9 feet 3, 9.
I mean, I can,
8 feet
I
10.
can find it. Well, it's interesting. The existing plate height is it's 18.3. It looks like it's 8'6" ceiling, but the plate is it's like a balloon frame. So they've ledgered the ceiling onto a much higher plate. So the fact is, we could lift these ceilings up all the way up to 10 feet without impacting the framing of the roof.
Is that part of your project?
Part of the, yes.
So to raise the ceilings from
In
8.6
some
to
rooms
10.
to raise, in the master right now, it's the only room we're doing. But a 6'8" head height in a 8'6" ceiling, just in general, if it was 7'6", 7'7", it just feels better as far as the space, seeing more of the sky.
Well, in a typical 8-foot ceiling with a 6'8" head height, you have 16 inches, which is in 8 feet, what, 1/6 of the overall height of the room. I think I'm doing that right. It seems to me that adding another 12 inches or 11 inches and removing all of the decorative cornice on the outside of the building is a pretty drastic thing for a relatively small amount of increased light. I have a house with an 8'6" ceiling, and all of our windows and doors are at 6'8" header height. It's built in 1923, so it's a contemporary, nothing as grand as this house. But there's plenty of light that comes into our house through those windows, and it's not because they're not tall, it's because of the size. So let me ask you a different question. Is Mark Hobart, your preservation architect, here today?
He is not here today.
Okay, well, I had a number of problems with his report, so maybe I will just review them with you so we get this into the record. He has gone through the 9, 10 Secretary of Interior standards and made drawn some conclusions that I'm having a lot of trouble with. Second one, which says the historic character of property will be retained and preserved, and the removal of distinctive materials or alteration features will be avoided. I'm foreshortening that. That's the standard, and yet in his description of the project, he says that the proposed work retains the historic character and feeling of the property and doesn't address the materials, removing the entry, removing the bay, removing the cornice detail. I don't see on your plans the retention of this header, this architectural detail on the outside. So I really can't understand that statement. I mean, you're not preserving any of the materials that are character defining on the outside of the building at the top.
Yeah, and I felt as though where that was going is that he was talking about setting style and form of the house without dialing into a specific.
Right. That's talking about materials,
right.
Character defining materials,
right.
Not setting, which is another consideration. Not landscaping, another consideration. Not exclusively. None of these are exclusive.
Right.
He says in the in number 3, under number 3, the range of the property will be recognized as a physical record of its time. I'm again foreshortening these. And his conclusion is that the changes are intended to reinforce the historic character, even though the very details that make this building look different than what we're building today, which is your proposed architecture, are going. Again, I think that's a total contrast with what the Secretary of Interior standards are intended to convey to somebody looking for this, looking to do a renovation in an historic district. And I won't prolong this. I have problems with his explanation in Standard 5, 6, and in 9, where it says new additions, exterior alterations, or related construction will not destroy historic materials, features, or spatial relationships. Again, I just do not understand how this proposal, this design, even addresses this issue. In fact, it seems to me it totally ignores these standards. And yet his conclusion is that, in fact, this is a compliant design.
I guess my question back is it as a contributing resource to a neighborhood, or is it as a standalone? Whenever we've done historic homes, we evaluate what are the elements that are making it an example of its style at that time that it was built, make it a distinctive example. Is it the cornice of the house that makes this house as important as it is? And this really is for you to decide. In our going forth, we were of the opinion that it would still hold together stylistically. It's a Mediterranean revival house, and I would say there's probably many ways one could do that. If these cornices or the cornice and the porch elements are the defining features, then you're right. By the Secretary of Interior standards, we are removing something that removes its historic value. But the only reason I was going to setting, style, and form is that's what I was reading regarding the district itself, as opposed to, because these are contributors to a district as opposed to, are we taking a standalone building and evaluating it as a standalone element? It's a question for you.
So I'm not a trained architect. I'm the second youngest member of this board, and I've been on the board for 10 years, and I've gone to maybe 16 to 20 seminars, so I would be able to understand the Secretary of Interior standards and how to apply them in this setting. I have never been to a seminar where they didn't use individual features to create the whole sense of an historic record of a property or a building. In an historic district, it's not the box that makes the district a district. It's each individual representation of historic architectural features, design, style. So stripping this building of what I consider to be the historic fabric, that's a term used in these seminars a lot, takes away a building takes this building out of its historic setting, leaves it in the same place. It's in the district, but it removes its significance from the district, and that it diminishes the district. And frankly, I don't understand why anybody would do this. I've heard your explanations. Why buy a house like this in a historic district, a nationally registered historic district, only to make it look like what is built all over North Palo Alto, where I live, as modern buildings? I mean, this is basically now a modern building. We're not doing a very good job here of preserving our history if we're going to strip this stuff away. So I guess my feeling is that this historic report, and I'm sorry that the author is not here, is disingenuous at best, if it's not outright fraud. And I use that term very carefully. I cannot understand how anybody comes to these conclusions when they are contrary to everything that I understand and have learned in these seminars by experts in the business. Thanks.
May I respond to a couple of comments? This is not modern by any stretch. We are proposing a different cornice detail. It's still a detail. And we're proposing a different porch that still has detail to it. So, I mean, I understand when you say that we're stripping it completely. I look at it and think we're keeping the essential character, except we're raising windows and changing a cornice. And so that this is where, you know, we come before you and we say, is what we've done, is it okay? Is it minimal enough? And what I'm hearing back, obviously, is that the cornice is very, very important, and I hear that. I'm only saying that because we didn't come in and just strip this thing completely. I'm very respectful of old houses. I've been working on them my whole professional life. If I didn't think this was going to be a stunningly beautiful house, I wouldn't be doing it. So I'm not stripping all the details off of this house and making it a modern house like I'd see anywhere in Palo Alto. Okay.
Let's move on to continue with questions, then we'll come back. Roger, any questions for the applicant or staff?
I'm sort of a little taken aback here, your comment that...
We're going to start with questions and to the staff.
Questions. The question is, I guess I've just... I mean, I just don't quite follow... Well, you just said that there are a lot of features remaining on the house, and which ones are those? Which feature?
The way that all the windows are detailed, the heads, the sills, we're basically only talking about a cornice and an entry porch. And so it's a very austere house. It's a very simple house. And the moves we're making, I thought, were very simple and respectful.
Okay.
You know, I'm not sure I have any questions.
Okay, thanks. All right. First of all, I passed this around to the staff and the board members. This is the home that, Ken, you did on I think it's Kingsley, the Gray Gables?
It's on Melville.
Melville, yeah. This came from your website. I looked at that last night. Some wonderful work projects for sure. And then I just made a print of this one on the one on Melville, and where it says the original front facade with its Victorian wraparound porch was retained and restored. So I understand that, and I agree with your comment that you've done a lot of work on historic structures, and you certainly understand good historic detail. I thought this one, there's an award ceremony coming up. I don't know if you're on the award ceremony, but anyway,
Thank you.
The way the color works, I think. Anyway, my comment is that you are very successful and have a great ability to maintain historic structure. I'm looking on your the letter you provided in our packet, and your last sentence says, "Our proposed changes preserve the massing of the structure." My question is, would you explain how removing the front door portico detailing, removing the curved bay window on the front, removing the existing cornices up on the upper levels, for this National Registered District property, can you explain how that preserves the massing? and let me make one other comment that and respond to one of your other comments. You talked about, is the house the detail of this, is the detail of this. The gestalt of the design is all the pieces. And for street-facing major detailing, to remove those, my question is, how does that reach your goal of preserving the massing? That's my question.
Well, I mean, it's a fairly substantial house, and the massing is completely retained, except that the porch and the bay have been there's a different detail sense to them, but the massing is essentially there. I mean, I stand by that 100%. I didn't say I didn't change any element on the house, but we're talking about minor elements. So the massing, in my mind, is still essentially the same.
Okay. Yes, thank you for that answer.
Still questions?
Still questions, yes, good. Pat, one more question, please.
Yeah, I had one more question. I had a few about the main structure, but, you know, I really believe in this case, too, that the garage is very significant to the house, to the block, to the district, and the detail work on this garage is unbelievable. It details the same features of the original building. It's the same roofing material. It's clad in the tile. And to strip that accessory structure of that too what was the reason for having to do that? Especially when mostly we see places that, well, I have to do it because it's destroyed, it's so deteriorated. This house has been maintained, it looks like, in 100% beautiful condition for being almost 100 years old. And it surprises me, if it were reviewed again, it would not be a Category 3 contributor. It would be a Category 1 or 2. So to change that structure, can you explain that as well?
Well, the reason that I had explained in the original presentation is that when we added the extension on the back, I was trying to weave these two together in a way that held together, and seeing that the garage is kind of a subservient structure to the main house, it felt like that was an okay approach for that building.
Thank you.
Beth.
Martin, it reminds me that I should disclose that I have been by this house a number of times and looked quite closely, and I looked again this morning, and the garage, because it is two-story, is very visible from that Cowper side. It's not a garage that's tucked way off back in the corner. It is a very visible thing that has been there for this period of time, and I can see rationale if you want to put the metal roofing on some completely new structure, but I find it hard to make this work with all I've learned in historic preservation. And the other question is one for staff, and that is around the integrity. Would these changes make a difference in the integrity of this house, and what might be the ramifications for the entire Professorville?
Thank you, Board Member Bunenberg. So the stats analysis is that the proposed work would affect the integrity of the property. When integrity is affected, it can make a property that's currently eligible or listed, it could affect its eligibility. And if the property is part of a district, it could affect the eligibility of the district. Now, there's been no detailed analysis of how that might occur, but it is a potential effect.
In other words, if this happens to one house, then somebody else will decide to do, well, I could do a similar thing on my house. And
So there's the potential direct impact of what would occur to this particular property, as well as potential cumulative impacts that could occur over time. So yes, there's that consideration.
thank you very much.
Yes, Roger, go ahead, question.
Just to follow up on that, does this, after our meeting, does this go to ARB as well or not? And does it go to City Council or not? So there's actually, and then are they even bound to do anything that we ask today?
So under the municipal code, this is not a discretionary review. There's no discretionary permit or review required for this project. So it's building permits are what's required to do the work. The municipal code does provide for the HRB's review and recommendation to the owner prior to filing of the building permits.
Okay, David.
So, Matt, I participated, I should disclose, I also have been by the project. I was there yesterday morning in particular to look at the condition of the house. I was a part of the committee that is creating the Professorville design guidelines with Martin and other community members. Right, and Roger was on the first round. Those guidelines are now out for public comment, and I think they're coming up before the council, maybe later this summer. Would this project, in your opinion, be consistent with those proposed guidelines?
So the draft guidelines do discuss spatial relationships of the property, and they do note that the historic pattern of parking and accessory structures in general in Professorville is that they're located to the rear of the building, essentially. And so the proposal, there definitely could be an effect.
So I was thinking about those guidelines this morning, and I think that we have spent a fair amount of time in the guidelines describing compatibility and preservation of details in both additions and renovations of existing buildings in the district. Am I not remembering that? Is that correct, or am I misremembering?
That is correct.
Okay.
All right, thanks. I'd like to disclose also I've been by the house many times. In fact, I mentioned to the owner, Melissa, I'm part of the Palo Alto Run Club, and on Wednesdays we do a run around the streets of Palo Alto. So we often go by there. I also want to comment that one of the beauties of your existing home is I'm also, I do a lot of architectural, historical work, also doing a project up in San Francisco in Italian Mediterranean style. So every time I've gone by your house, I actually appreciate the details that are there, and kind of learned about, okay, what's the beauty of this house, and what's the presentation of it. Ken, on your historic report that you had prepared, you hired the person, or the owner hired Mark?
Yes.
Holbert? Yeah, you hired him?
Not me, the owner did.
The owner. My question is on the second page. Mark Holbert, the preservation consultant, identifies the character defining features of this house as the entry porch and the east side bay. You're proposing to remove what those look like. How do you defend your preservation architects, your preservation's comment that those are character defining features that will not look like that if your project gets proposed? So.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would go back to the question that I brought before the board, which is it the specific elements for this house that we're looking at? And I believe me, I understand your response today. This is, I think the way that I understood Mark's analysis of this was he was looking at this more in terms of setting, style, and character in a district. And
okay.
and I understand what you're saying, but this is how we were going at it.
Yeah. as you've heard from other board members and staff, that we have very specific guidelines here, the 10 standards. And yeah, you're getting a very clear message that this project's not complying, but we're not into that part of the process yet. Okay, any other questions before we move on? Okay.
I actually
Yes.
wanted to make one
Question.
something maybe I could have incorporated into what I was talking about before. And I'll also disclose that I did the design for 450 Kingsley, which is right next door, Martha and Paul Chamberlain. That was 10 years ago, maybe. Okay. And I was in your same position 10 years ago doing that, presenting, and I had to come back, I think at least once after the original presentation. But anyway, so, and maybe one thing I would like to say in tandem with that is that it seems like the presentation process and the comments are sometimes harsh and painful, but I have to say in the end, it really makes for a better project. I've always felt that way. And I've always felt like this is such harsh criticism, but after reviewing it again, I felt like it really bettered the project in the end. But really what I'm getting at is because the height of the windows on that second floor seems to be such an important issue that we're all kind of chiming in on, I'm wondering if you have had a chance to pass this through structural engineering, because anytime you do that, you have, headers. If you raise that header, the framing above there needs to be a certain dimension, and I'm sure that you've already investigated that. I don't want to get into that. But I think one possible solution, and this picture kind of indicates the relationship between the cornice and the top of the window. I mean, couldn't you just very simply raise the top of the window just up as far as you can, and preserve the cornice? You could even push this detail up into the cornice where the bottom frieze of the cornice kind of comes out. I think that would be a lovely detail that wouldn't take away the historic. That I think that would be something that the board would better accept.
Yes.
So I think that might be something that you might consider. And because I think if you're adding 11 inches, that seems like a lot. I think you've got at least 6 or 8 inches above these windows without touching the cornice. Right. And that would give you a lot of light upstairs. So that was my secondary comment.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to public comment. Any member of the public who would like to speak on this agenda item, please make yourself known. Okay, I see no cards. Okay, we'll bring it back. On our normal process, we have applicant closing comments, but I'm going to leave the public hearing open for now in case there are other questions for the applicant. All right. Let's bring it back to the board for any motions, recommendations, or more comments. Beth?
Are we going to do comments first before a motion?
Yeah, we'll do comments, yes. Good.
I really feel very strongly that the decorative cornices are, to me, a unifying, they tie the building together. It's almost like a crown. Maybe understated, but that they are an extremely important part of the design, and that we would lose far too many historic materials by the changes suggested. To me, it would represent a degradation of the design. The house most likely would lose integrity, and as I've said, these kinds of changes would then open the door to others who wanted to take something off to make it look more modern. If more light is needed in the front of the house, look at this real estate ad that is both posted up here. It's clearly a late afternoon shot, and the house has a great deal of sun coming into it. I don't have the date on this, but clearly it's older than the style of the real estate ad. And so that appears to me that to do all that degradation of material to get light, and is there anywhere in the Secretary of Interior standards that says you must provide light? I don't think I've seen that. I very much disagree with the preservationist report, as other members have stated. I think it minimizes the changes and does not pay attention to the important features.
Okay, thank you. Any other board members have comments? Okay,
I think
Member Bauer.
we all concur.
I think my comments make it pretty clear that I think this is not in compliance with the Secretary of Interior standards number 2, 3, 5, 6, and 9. I am distressed by the loss of the materials that actually create the style. Shape and form are just two of many different characteristics that as a whole come together to express an architect's vision. When I saw the proposed new building, it looks or reminded me of a project that I walk by on Edgewood Drive frequently that was built maybe 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 5, that is a modern version of this particular design proposal. And that's by itself, maybe in 50 years, will be considered historically significant, but I can't tell you how distressed that this project makes me, especially because we are on the cusp of actually creating design guidelines for this district, which will prevent, I think, will help prevent this kind of architectural mistake. So I would like to make a motion when it's appropriate to that effect.
Roger.
Yeah, it's kind of a sad situation that the Professorville, which have been futzing around, I was on their first guidelines, 4 or 5 years ago, and now it should have been approved, put in place and approved by the city council such that these kind of situations would not happen. And I don't know who's to blame, but it's just bad. I mean, I do a lot of homes in Palo Alto. We have 10 or 15 underway right now, and I'd say 10 of them are tile roofed homes. And most owners that I deal with want traditional looking homes because they see that home has details, and it's not a simple modern box, which is basically what this is going to be, is a box with a tile roof. All the nice details and things that make the home interesting are going to be gone. It's going to be a big box. And I just think the value of the home will go down dramatically compared to what if you left at least the cornices and all that and did some with the windows. I just think you should talk to some real estate agents, and the value of your home is going to go down dramatically. I'm talking a couple $1 million, because it doesn't show that there's anything there except a box with a tile roof. There's no interest. It's not even modern in a way. It just becomes like someone forgot to finish the house. They got to the walls and decided not to do the cornices and everything. I think it's a terrible decision, but we have no control over it, so not much else we can say.
Pat.
This is not really that important to the whole view. I think we all agree about the architectural fabric and historic fabric of the house will be destroyed, but this house in particular, I've gone by it, and sometimes I haven't in 5 years, and I have never really, and I've seen a lot of historic houses in a lot of historic towns, and I've never seen the detail work in the corners that has created and is in wonderful condition as this house. And it's just, and the house in Professorville is in such a significant location on a large corner lot with beautiful view to the public. And it's just a shining star on the, not just on that block, but on all of Kingsley. You know, most all of those houses have been preserved, but this one even stands out, you know, and it's sad if it ends up losing those qualities it has right now.
Thank you. So I've, as I mentioned, I've jogged by this house many times and admired it. And I think, Melissa, you mentioned you've owned it for about 8 or 9 years, something like that, yeah. And anyway, the landscape looks like it's pretty well maintained, and looks like you're really very caring about the house. I also want to share, I had the same experience that Board Member Wimmer had. Is I've been an applicant before the board before I became a member of the board, and you know, I heard you know, criticism of my proposal for my client's half, and you know, did not like hearing that. But once I calmed down from that and I took counsel from the very capable board, I did make some changes. And as Board Member Wimmer said, actually the project actually got improved. And so part of the resource of the Historic Resources Board to homeowners is to you know, give suggested counsel for what to do to maintain the character of a home. And I know your architect, Ken, has the genius to be able to do that, as he's done in other places in the neighborhood. And so when I saw the proposed changes here, I mean, my first response was, you've got to be kidding. But let's talk about the more specific issues here of the Secretary of Interior Standards. So the, again, the whole gestalt of all the pieces make the character, and that's why it's such an important landmark structure. It's visible from 2 streets. It's visible. This is so that's why these details, as you've heard other board members say, contributes to this to the neighborhood character and the specific structure itself. This is a major structure you own, and congratulations that you are the caretaker of this property. And I've also believe that owners of historic homes, by the nature of owning a historic home in a significant significant home as yours, is actually a steward of culture. And so I think it's important that owners of significant homes take that stewardship seriously, and then do what's necessary, behave in a way so that it's consistent with the cultural standards of well, it actually has some national listing. So there's a national culture, and there's certainly a specific Palo Alto culture, and very specifically Professorville culture. And I think you know, all of us who own historic homes, and there's several of us that do, I mean, we are stewards for who's the next generation of owners of these significant homes, and to act in a way that starts removing some of the character-defining aspects. I think it's almost a moral obligation of what's culturally important to where we live, and I mean, I think that's a good moral compass to follow. So, any other comments? We're looking for recommendations or motions. Yeah.
All right. So, with great reluctance, I'd like to make a motion, and it's not easy to make this a motion because we volunteer our time in the understanding that we're trying to preserve our history, on Palo Alto's history. But my motion is that this application is not consistent with the municipal code sections 1649.050B, and that in particular it is not consistent with the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, and those would be 2, 3, 5, 6, and 9. I would also like to include in this motion a recommendation that the property owner revise this project and bring it back to us for reconsideration. I feel bad that that's the end of my motion. I'd just like to make a comment about this. I feel bad for homeowners that have to come before any board and have this experience. This is hard. It's hard for us, harder for them. I think in this case, the professionals they've hired have failed them. It's simply not good service to bring a project of this importance before a board, a public board, and then have to endure the kind of criticism we have provided. And again, it's difficult for me as a board member to do this, but I really think this building represents one of the best examples of this architecture in this city. It's virtually untouched on the outside. And to remove these features that we've discussed today is just eliminates it as a building of consideration in the historic district.
I'll second the motion. Okay. Okay. So that's been moved and seconded. Any comments before we vote on the motion?
I just maybe make a quick comment.
Yeah.
Is there any way that we can, I guess, in the end, provide encouragement? Like, could we just say? I mean, obviously, the themes that we are objecting to are obvious. It's the front entry feature, the bay, the cornice, and probably the garage. Mm-hmm. I guess so. Maybe if we could summarize that, and are we asking that they come back with a revised proposal?
Yes.
So maybe we could just summarize so that they have a direct path to they know kind of what our concerns are and what how they can come back with a proposal that might please the board a little bit better in a positive way. I guess that's what I'm trying to get
Will
to.
the maker of the motion care to address that, or would the maker of the motion conclude that the applicant has heard those summaries of details already?
Well, Margaret, my feeling was that the bulk of our conversation today, which focused on a number of specific items, I didn't mention the garage. I think the garage standing seam metal roof is completely incompatible with this project. It's different. It is differentiation, but it's not compatible.
Correct. Yeah, I agree.
But I think we have already done that.
Yeah.
So I don't see any benefit. I think it's pretty clear our discussion today has given the applicant and architectural team direction.
Yeah. I do realize on our normal process, I forgot to ask the applicant for any closing comment. Is it okay to go back to that, or is it?
Certainly.
Yeah, good. I'd like to invite the applicant for any closing comment, please. Thank you.
Thanks. I understand all of your comments. We did ask for a study session. Just wanted to put this on the record. We were told that a study session would have been great, so we could come and you could tell me all of your thoughts before going through a public, motion. So it was just a timing thing. What we understood from staff is, no, you can't have one. This was a long time ago. I would have loved to have this dialogue with you and come before you with something that is approvable. So I just wanted to say that. And I noticed today there's a possibility of a study session, and it took a while to get to this hearing. So I just wanted to say study sessions are great when we're, in this kind of venue. So, but thanks for your comments.
Staff.
Thank you, Chair Bernstein. Regarding study sessions, a study session would occur in front of the board. It would be the same format as what we're seeing here. However, there's no fee currently attached to a study session, so the applicant would essentially be getting free analysis and free advice. So that's why staff required the applicant to submit an application, pay the fee, and go through the process, which is essentially the same as what would occur at a study session.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So we do have a motion. It's been seconded. Any other comments before we vote? No? Okay. All in favor of the motion signal by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously with all is present. Okay, thank you. That concludes this agenda item. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Our next item is study session. There are none on this agenda. Next is approval of minutes from March 10th. Any motion to amend or move to approve?
Chair Brinson, can I ask a question of staff?
Yeah.
So I see this is the full ARB, HRB meeting, and there's a lot of, I presume all we're doing is just approving our joint part. Is that right?
Yes, the HRB would really just be responsible for reviewing and approving the minutes relating to the HRB's testimony, not the ARB's testimony.
Okay, thanks. So, Chair Bernstein, I'll move to approve the minutes.
Okay, any second?
Who's absent?
Okay, I'll second those. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. For the April 21st minutes, any motion to amend or approve?
April 21st. Was I there? Yeah.
Okay, sounds like the last motion was to April 21st. So now we're going to the March 10th.
Yeah, I apologize, Chair
So,
Bernstein.
so let me repeat. The minutes for April 21st have been moved and seconded and approved. Now we're looking at the minutes of March 10th. Any motion to amend or approve?
I
So
move to
moved.
approve them.
You move, or I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, March 10th. Thank you. Okay, next is subcommittee items. See none. And board member questions, comments, and announcements. Beth.
I wanted to call attention to the fact that the organization Palo Alto Stanford Heritage and the Palo Alto Historical Association are having what they call a double header on Sunday, May the 15th from 12 to 4, Lucy Stern Community Center on Middlefield, and the Palo Alto Historical Association portion is Eichler Comes to Palo Alto, and one of Joseph Eichler's son will be speaking. And these are free and open to the public, and everybody's invited. And then there's also a list of walking tours coming up. So this is an important paper.
Any other questions, comments, announcement about board member Bauer?
I'd like to share with the board and for staff and Councilman Holman our collective experience at the California Preservation annual, I think it was the annual meeting. Roger and I went to a seminar about the seismic upgrading of historic buildings and the use of different and new materials, and it was an astoundingly eye-opening experience. They showed us a number of different ways that brick buildings, which are very difficult to make seismically safe, can be upgraded with minimal invasive treatment. The standard treatment is to put a 6-inch concrete wall behind them, on one side or the other, dowel in, glue the brick into it, and pour that wall, and the cement is used. They showed us a way to use that they have developed using carbon fiber material that is epoxied onto the brick in just 12-inch wide strips, 4 feet apart, and they did it on 3-story brick walls, and that created enough seismic strength to actually make that building comply with the California Historical Building Code. And the other thing, so the techniques were amazing to me as a builder, because if you can create a way to make a brick wall strong enough to resist collapse in an earthquake, that has really significant impact on historic buildings that are masonry, and a lot of them are. The other thing that we learned in that particular seminar, and other board members may have other things to share, is that there was a speaker who reviewed the California Historical Building Code and pointed out several different parts of that code that I didn't know applied. One is that code has to be applied by law to historic buildings. And I thought that was an option of the building inspector. It is not. It is a legal requirement. And that makes a huge difference when it comes to features like handrails on stairs that are 30 inches or 32 inches off the floor that don't meet public building codes. So I'm sure staff knew this. I can see Councilman Holman knew this. I didn't. Anyway, I'm really, this is the huge value of our attending these seminars.
And there was some reference to our boards getting to know the building officials and making a bridge to make that something they'd heard about rather than suddenly demanded.
Chair Bernstein, just a quick note on the State Historic Building Code. It's optional for the owner to apply the building code. If the owner requests the State Historic Building Code, then the local government is obligated and required to apply it, but it's not required that the owner apply the State Historic Building Code. It is their option.
Councilmember Holman.
At least in the past, I agree with your comments from both sides here. In the past, at least, it wasn't just historic buildings that had access to the State Historic Building Code, but it was buildings that are 50 years old or older, which would include buildings that are, maybe that's been changed, so maybe you can clarify that. And one of the things, because most lay people don't know about the State Historic Building Code, so one of the things I hope our building department's doing, but I don't know if they are or not, is making it available to people proactively. So that's another piece. And then the other is, I appreciate the update about the brick buildings. I hope there was something learned that you can report this meeting or another meeting about how single-family homes can also be reinforced, because we see buildings, not reinforced, we see buildings taken apart and essentially demolished and rebuilt stick by stick. And we see that all around town. The other is, Beth, you said noon to 4, I think it was, or noon to 5, but the past newsletter says 2 to 5, and then the tall tree says 2 to 4. So we have 3 different times referenced here.
Probably go on. Thank you.
So what is correct?
So let me share something else. Let's see. You asked a question about single-family dwellings. This technique would apply anywhere. The hardest projects to actually retrofit are the commercial buildings, because commercial buildings involve multiple people, and so the commercial codes are far more stringent, because as an owner of a home, well, they want to protect everybody who doesn't have a decision about the public space, whereas in your home, you can actually make decisions that are maybe not the best ones, but you're not required to do any seismic upgrade. We also heard, I will follow this along, we heard from an engineer that specializes in seismic retrofits of historic or buildings that qualify could be historic. So this wasn't just limited to an actual designation. And he said the standards for those upgrades are different than the standards for a new building. And they're not intended, again, the code is intended to protect life in an earthquake, not to protect damage, not to prevent damage. So it was a very instructive seminar in a number of different ways.
I also attended the conference. I attended the workshop in the Mission District in San Francisco, and again, most enlightening. It's a very specific neighborhood with their concerns. They described the threat to that district as property values going up so dramatically that the developers want to come in and destroy some of the historic fabric there and put in more dense construction. So one of the ways that the district, through its district liaison and supervisor, have created a very interesting process to help prevent the changes, significant changes to the structures there. It's called a legacy business registry. And so if a mom and pop company's been there for 30 years, they're on the registry, and that has some level of historic protection. Very interesting. So it's a legacy business registry. It's a fascinating idea. And so that helps for the mom and pop shops where, they're a protected resource in the district. Very interesting. There's the I forget the name of it, La Raza Cultural something. I'll have to bring the information. But there's a cultural center there for that district. And so trying to educate through the arts, different seminars, lectures, that this is an intact historic cultural district. And then, so one of the challenges for San Francisco is that each district has a supervisor, so they're district-related elections, not citywide, as opposed to Palo Alto. It's you vote for a council member, not someone representing your district. So if there are 9 or 7 board of supervisors, yeah, you can have 100% support from your supervisor, but that's only 1/9 vote. So you're always in a minority position. So that's why you'll see San Francisco going into a lot of ballot measures, because the ballot measure then covers citywide. So interesting political challenge in that sense that, yeah, your representative only is a minority vote. So they're going through the idea of historic preservation to say, how do we get a historic designation, and then that gets the attention of every board of supervisor member. So anyway, so I thought that was just a very creative way to get a very specific thing. So Beth.
Certainly thanks to the city for sending us to that. And I also had attended one at the Presidio quite some years ago. And they were almost wringing their hands on what are we going to do with all these buildings. And then to go back later and see, here is Disney Museum, all sorts of nonprofits, buildings that look in great shape, and they even managed to maintain the wooden balcony railings. And I said, how'd you do that? Right here in the salt air. And they said, these were heart redwood from the site. They've been painted because the Army knows how to paint things. And so they had their original balcony railings. So thank you.
I also like to extend thanks to the City Council for directing funds so that we can attend these things. The public benefit is that we become a lot more educated from where we are. So these seminars are just really fantastic. Group. Any other items before we close? Roger.
On that, since I'd like to welcome Amy back officially as our coordinator, and nice to see you're no longer a mayor, are you? No, council member Holman, yeah. And our buddy here, we know him. So do we have anything coming up in the next week or two, next few months, or what, just out of curiosity?
There is an item scheduled for the May 26th HRB meeting, so that's the next meeting scheduled.
And then also, what's as far as getting the word out for study sessions for applicants? At what point, or when would if an applicant comes to say the development center, is there any direction of when they get notified that there's an option of this no fee study section?
So study sessions are not currently included in the HRB's bylaws. They are included in the ARB's bylaws, but there's not currently a format. So study sessions are something that has been talked about. It's not been determined what the format should be, what the fee should be, how that should occur in relation to a formal application, or how that really differs from a formal application. So at this time, it's an idea that hasn't been implemented yet, and we can work further towards that. And we understand that there are some benefits to having study sessions, but we need to make sure that the work that comes into the department is tracked in a certain way, and that fees are being paid in a certain way. So we currently do have a process to review projects. We're continuing to implement that process. It's the application review process.
In the guidelines that Roger and I were, he and I were on that committee, there was a comment on that draft to no fee study sessions are available, but it sounds like that's not really a formal thing yet, right?
Well, that was a draft.
That was a draft, yeah.
Draft work product. It was never adopted. It was never implemented. So again, we understand that it's an idea that's been out there. We understand that there's some benefits to that. There hasn't been enacted.
Okay. How can we get that formalized so that when an applicant comes to the development center, they're presented with that option?
I'd be happy to speak to that. One method that we have for discretionary project applications, as many of you know, if you've been through this IR process, when it's a two-story home or a second floor addition, above a certain square footage, we have what's called the preliminary review that they do pay for. They can pay for it online and then come and meet with our consultant architect. So something along those lines would be a nice thing to have, I would think. I think the suggestion, or I'll make it a suggestion. Matt noted that it's not in the bylaws of the HRB. I think the suggestion would be, that could be something to be added to the HRB bylaws in a typically a retreat, but it could be in a regular hearing. And so that would be something that you could think about bringing forward. That type of, those are two things I can think of offhand. For the preliminary review for architectural review, that is an application type. There is a fee that's several $1,000s. Usually it's a major project, commercial, structure, or maybe mixed use or multifamily. It's not usually a single family home. So I think there's a bit of a difference there for the types of projects that come through the HRB. Might think about that and the cost and such.
Can that be, to include that in the bylaws, can that be as simple as an agenda item on the next HRB meeting?
Well, I think another thing that goes along with requiring a fee is an amendment to our fee schedule. So, so it's a little bit more complicated than just one approach, which is put it on the HRB bylaws. Certainly putting on the HRB bylaws would be a good idea if that's something that you want to have as part of what you're doing here.
Can it, it's been discussed when Roger and I were on the committee that it's no fee, because, I mean, is there a way to structure it where there's no fee to the applicant, so the applicant just shows up and with some discussions of ideas?
Yeah, in the ARB for many years, and I would say almost decades, but I haven't been here quite yet, decades, is there has been a study session available, and typically those have been some city projects. They haven't come in for an application yet, and it is just sitting around a table, and staff doesn't prepare a report and this kind of thing because resources being what they are. So that's something.
Yeah, well, the Brown Act prevents a homeowner from calling board members to say, what do you think, what do you think, what do you think? So there's a no-fee approach, but that's not permitted. Is there some, I mean, to have a fee, I mean, that doesn't encourage an applicant to come speak to us to get our comments.
So I guess what I'm saying is, something could be entertained and, maybe put in the bylaws. Staff's involvement would be, limited or none, basically, if we're not getting a fee to support the resources that we expend in doing analyses and such.
I think that, Martin, there should be a fee just because to some degree staff has to be involved. They have to distribute the materials. I mean, there is a time effort on their part. I know that the IR has the $108, I think now it's $112 fee that you pay online if you want to meet with Arnold. I guess we could try to have something like that where, but they would probably be meeting with Matt or someone individually and not the board. But I think if they want to present something in front of the board, maybe that's the approach. And it's like a $250 fee, and they provide the materials, and the materials are distributed, and it's clear to us that it's a study session, and we just give feedback. I mean, I think that is something that we could pursue as an option.
I know the city's been, I see often words that get published to the effect of full fee recovery or something like that. Well, that's going to be more than $100. I mean, I imagine. Anyway.
Chair Bernstein, I would just like to mention that staff does provide consultation hours free of any fee or cost on a weekly basis, Mondays and Tuesdays, 10:30 to 12:30, or as other times as needed if an applicant can't meet it.
Is that just with you then?
That is just with staff.
Yeah, and because every so often, probably in the last 2 months, I got a call from someone, I can't recall, on a project, and she sounded quite confused. She says, it's kind of difficult to do this, and can I talk to you? And I'm not sure how she got my cell number exactly, and I referred her back to you. Recall that? And I said, so you would then meet with someone, you know, and I mentioned study session, but it would even be preliminary to a study session, and you might be explaining to them the secretary's standards, and do they have an architect that is going to, and that's what they would sort of be informed about?
Exactly, yeah. That's
and
exactly
that would
right.
then hopefully the owner or the person or the architect they've hired, maybe that isn't as familiar with our process, would be so informed of the kind of decision-making and recommendations that staff would make of the secretary standards?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So they would get advice not just on preservation standards, but also on permitting procedures and things like that they might not necessarily get from the HRB as well. So staff does recommend that applicants who are interested even in a study session or going to the board, that they should meet with staff first just to get a bigger, broader picture of the project and the process.
I actually really had not ever gone into the development center across the street. So first I walk in and there's Diana. And I go, oh, hi. And the process was very straightforward, simple, no fee. I was inquiring now, oh, can we put another little garage in part of the property or something? And oh, just, you know, you're next in line and just sit down and then someone will come and chat with you. And it was informative and simple, and I didn't have to go online and make an appointment, you know, 3 weeks down the line. I thought, well, I'll just walk in and just see what they have to say. So I guess people are aware of that as well. But it's not just about historic buildings, but the point person would be Matt in that case. Well, then, that's helpful for them.
Councilmember Holman.
Yeah, dare I suggest that I think recommendations and suggestions by the board to change the bylaws are appropriate in a good format. A good format in which to have that discussion would be a retreat, so I don't know what the schedule is for the retreat follow-up that was going on. And then also, like the information that you were dispelling or dispensing here, David, about, you know, seismic retrofit and such, and the legacy business registry. That's all great information, but if it lives only here right now, and it isn't also shared with ARB and building staff, then it doesn't help our community much. And so it seems to me, you know, that'd be a great conversation on how to implement some of that and how to spread some of that and how to integrate some of that, pick and choose whatever. State Historic Building Code for single-family homes, the same thing. So I don't know if you have an update about when the reconvening of the HRB retreat's going to happen. I think there were several other items that were to be continued as well.
So at this time, we haven't rescheduled or reconvened the retreat. So those items are still in process. Some of those are on staff's plate to work on, and so we should have an update for the board relatively soon on that. About reconvening the retreat, and we can address the study session item as well.
Another comment by Board Member Bauer.
I was going to suggest that we actually have a agendized item about bylaws. I think we could have this discussion in a board meeting, and then we can adopt change in the bylaws, and then make a recommendation to council, provide whatever the adequate fee is. I don't think we can't set fees, and I am sensitive about staff time. I think, if I understood, Matt, your explanation today, there really wasn't any point in having a study session on this because our recommendation is just a recommendation. It's different than when the ordinance, when there's a discretionary consideration, where then I think the study session should be mandatory. I'm ambivalent about the fee issue because I think we decided we wanted no fee to encourage people to come talk to us before they spent thousands of dollars on architectural plans.